Congratulations. You've made it through the hustle and bustle of yet another holiday season. Perhaps your season went well, there were no fights about politics, and you got to see the people you love and care for most. Perhaps your season was the exact opposite, and you're relieved to be past Christmas and New Year's, retreating from family gatherings until next year. Wherever your holiday fell along that spectrum, if everyone made it out alive, you had a much better holiday than the Hassel family in 2018. The season of twinkle lights and warm gatherings fractured when shots rang out on New Year's Eve. When the smoke cleared, an Army deployment love triangle forever altered dozens of lives. This is Conduct Unbecoming. I'm Erin, and I'm your host. Tyrone Hassel III was in college when he resolved to enlist in the Army. There, he met Kamaya while they were both stationed at Fort Carson in Colorado in 2015. Their relationship quickly became serious, and Tyrone Jr., our protagonist's father, only learned about their relationship when they got engaged. The two married in 2016 and soon received joint orders to Fort Stewart in Georgia. There, Sergeant Tyrone Hassel worked as a wheel mechanic, and his wife, Specialist Kamaya Hassel, worked as a truck driver. Given how many folks have the same last name in this episode, I'm going to refer to people by their first name, and when I'm speaking about Tyrone's father, I'll refer to him as Tyrone Jr. I know it's a little bit confusing, but I do think it's the best solution given the variety of names. Friends at Fort Stewart remembered seeing Kamaya and Tyrone snuggled up at a Super Bowl party in February 2018. And just from seeing that interaction, they knew, without a doubt, that Tyrone was very in love with his wife. A few months after the Super Bowl, they deployed jointly to South Korea. The two had a young son, the fourth in the family's naming convention. And I don't know whose family Tyrone IV stayed with while the couple deployed to Korea, but if pressed, I would say it was likely Kamaya's family, who lived nearby in Georgia. But Kamaya also had a good relationship with Tyrone's family. So when the deployment ended and the holidays rolled around, Kamaya was fine with the plan to make use of their block leave to travel to Tyrone's father in St. Joseph's Township, Michigan for the holidays. Christmas came and went without incident, though perhaps the young parents learned that children are just as entertained with a giant box as they are with the toys that come inside it. On New Year's Eve, the two decided to celebrate separately. Kamaya elected to stay behind at her father-in-law's house to ring in the new year with their nearly 2-year-old son, while Tyrone decided to attend a family party. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, Tyrone left the family party and began the drive home. He told Kamaya he was on his way, and that he was bringing her food since she had missed the festivities. He parked on his father's driveway, braced himself for the shock of Michigan in December, stepped out of the car, and began to walk toward the house. Instead of returning to the warm embrace of his wife, of his family's home, a shot rang out, followed by another and another. Tyrone was shot multiple times on the driveway. The shooting left a bullet hole in the garage door and another in the back fence. Neighbors observed a man getting into a black car after the shooting, but it was dark, and it was hard to make out too many details. Kamaya called 911 in a panic. She told the dispatcher that she needed help because her husband had been shot. Next, she called her father-in-law, who raced home from that family party. She appeared distraught to first responders and family members, and she attempted to climb over paramedics to accompany Tyrone's body. In the wake of this young man's murder, his family came together to support his young, grieving widow. Most days she would sit on the couch, barely moving or going anywhere, and Tyrone's family sat with her and catered to her needs for 12 days. When Kamaya tried to go outside, her father-in-law would stop her, unsure if it was safe for her to go, unsure if she was also a target. He'd walk outside before her to see if anything seemed amiss before they'd set off for the funeral home and church, pulling together the details and plan to lay Tyrone to rest. Kamaya cooperated with police investigating Tyrone's death. Obviously, as his spouse, Kamaya held lots of answers the police were curious about, but she said she had no idea who would want to target Tyrone. The police naturally inquired whether Tyrone had life insurance. Tyrone held a pretty typical $400,000 service members group life insurance policy. Those premiums were deducted from his paycheck, and Kamaya was his named beneficiary. This policy was in addition to the $100,000 death gratuity that the military provides to next of kin when a service member dies while on active duty. Investigators continued to work on the case, trying to find some motive, some reason that someone might target Tyrone, but they were coming up empty. While they searched for leads, the Army processed and delivered that $100,000 death gratuity to Tyrone's next of kin, Kamaya. But the ink wasn't dry on that check for long before the police received an anonymous tip. A woman called in and disclosed that her son informed her that Kamaya was having an illicit affair with another soldier. The day that anonymous woman called, 2 soldiers approached the Army's Criminal Investigation Division at Fort Stewart. They were concerned about their friend, Specialist Jeremy Cuellar. Cuellar, like Kamaya, drove a truck on base. One of the soldiers told CID that he was worried for his own safety because he was one of only a few people who knew about the relationship Cuellar had with Kamaya, and because Cuellar described how he'd killed Tyrone, first shooting him, then standing over him and shooting him again in the head to confirm Tyrone would die. Cuellar needed to confirm Tyrone would die because, as he'd explained to his friend, divorce was not an option. It's a little unclear from the source materials, but it appears that another witness testified to much of this same evidence, of Cuellar explaining that he had a relationship with Kamaya and of his plans to kill her husband. This other witness was another female soldier Cuellar was sleeping with, in addition to Kamaya, and in addition to his wife. Because, yes, of course, part of the reason they had to keep their relationship hush-hush was that Cuellar was also married. That soldier and side piece told him that it was a stupid idea to go kill Tyrone. She implored him to think of Tyrone and Kamaya's child, and his own wife, but Cuellar wasn't dissuaded. So I suppose I owe you a small correction here. Tyrone, Kamaya, and Cuellar weren't in a love triangle. It was a love pentagon at best. When CID darkened his doorstep, a Sergeant Golston disclosed that he'd sold Cuellar 2 firearms before Tyrone's death, including one 9mm, which matched the caliber of the murder weapon. CID surveilled Cuellar much more successfully than NCIS surveilled Darnell in Episode 4. When they eventually searched Cuellar's black Chevy Impala, they found 9mm ammunition and a magazine. CID provided the Impala's license plate to authorities in Michigan. After Michigan authorities confirmed that the Impala had been in the area on New Year's Eve, CID arrested Cuellar on January 11, 2019. He refused to speak with officers. The night before Tyrone's funeral, Tyrone Jr.'s phone rang, and a police officer working the case asked him to come in with Kamaya, and to make sure they brought her phone. Kamaya had been cooperative with police, and she was willing to go to the station, she naturally grabbed her phone and they drove over. I do wonder what that car ride was like. When they arrived, police directed Tyrone Jr. to sit in a waiting area and invited Kamaya into the interview room with which she was now familiar. After the door swung closed, they told Tyrone Jr. he could go home, and that it would be a long night. Police advised Kamaya of her Miranda rights at about 9 p.m., before they confronted her with their knowledge of her affair, which she denied engaging in. About 50 minutes later, police asked if she'd be willing to take a polygraph test, and she was. She later claimed the police told her that it was mandatory. Together, investigators and Kamaya traveled to the Michigan State Police headquarters in Lansing, where I guess they kept polygraph equipment and examiners. Before the polygraph, Kamaya was told that she was free to leave at any time, and again advised of her Miranda rights. Kamaya signed her Miranda rights advisement card, confirming in writing that she had in fact been advised of her Miranda rights. She then spoke with a detective for about 90 minutes, confirming what she told the police in St. Joseph's Township. She reiterated that she was not involved in her husband's death. She then sat for her polygraph exam, after which everyone took a break. At about 1:30 a.m., police told her they knew she was lying, which is debatable given the science around polygraphs. It's not actually clear in any of the source material whether the test actually indicated some kind of deception or if the police didn't particularly care and just said that it did. It bears repeating here that the police are allowed to lie. They don't have to be beacons of honesty during interviews. Whatever the background facts were, the plan worked. After being accused of lying, Kamaya confessed. She said she and Cuellar planned her husband's murder by Snapchat because they believed the messages were not recoverable. She unraveled the lies she'd been telling the police and her in-laws about the death of the father of her child. She detailed her role in his killing, signed her written confession, and was arrested on January 12th, just hours before Tyrone's funeral. From jail, Kamaya called her mother. She told her mother that she'd been mixed up in something. She again admitted her role in Tyrone's death, telling her mother that she and Cuellar planned the murder while they were all deployed to Korea, claiming they did it for love. A number of people testified that Cuellar and Kamaya cited their love and the $400,000 payout as their motives for murder. But if the motive was love, there was still the issue of Mrs. Cuellar. Cuellar claimed that he'd been planning on divorcing his wife, admitting he was all over the place and that he'd mistakenly believed Kamaya was his life. He placed the blame for everything on Kamaya, saying she manipulated him into believing Tyrone's death was the only way they could be together, the only way they could have children together. But Tyrone's death doesn't fast-track a divorce, and it doesn't do away with side pieces. A forensic review of Cuellar and Kamaya's cell phones revealed they were communicating in the hours leading up to Tyrone's murder. Cuellar knew to be near the Hassel family home because Kamaya told him that Tyrone was on his way back with food. In a direct contradiction to Cuellar's claims, Kamaya's attorney said Cuellar coerced Kamaya into engaging in the murder plot. On July 18, 2019, she nevertheless pled guilty to first-degree premeditated murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. Approximately 2 weeks later, Cuellar pled guilty to second-degree murder on the condition that he speak with Tyrone Hassel Jr. During his conversation with Tyrone Jr., Cuellar said he was truly sorry, though he acknowledged his apology, quote, ain't worth shit. The trial court sentenced 22-year-old Kamaya Hassel to life in prison without parole, and 24-year-old Cuellar to 65 to 90 years in prison. The Berrien County Prosecutor's Office acknowledged that technically justice was served, but that they still lost, observing the Army lost a good soldier, Tyrone Jr. lost a good son, and Tyrone IV lost a good father. Cuellar sought leave to withdraw his plea, which the Court of Appeals for the State of Michigan and the Michigan State Supreme Court summarily denied. Tyrone Jr. has reportedly considered moving away from the scene of his son's murder, but he said that moving would feel like he was leaving his son, his best friend, behind. Kamaya's primary contention on appeal was that she received ineffective assistance of counsel. The first instance of ineffective assistance of counsel, she claimed, was that her trial counsel failed to file a motion to suppress her inculpatory statements to police, that confession she made. The second instance she took umbrage with was that counsel failed to pursue a defense based on battered partner syndrome. An ineffective assistance of counsel claim is a tough hill to hike, and the appellate court made quick work of the incriminating statements argument, which was kind of to be expected given her multiple Miranda warnings and waiver. Although she didn't take the stand at trial, Kamaya testified during a Ginther hearing that she made the incriminating statements in Lansing because she was tired, because she was sleep-deprived, because she couldn't fall asleep at night. And that might have been true. There are some very obvious reasons why she might have struggled to sleep at night. But whatever her exhaustion level was, it wasn't something she communicated to the police. Her counsel also testified at that Ginther hearing, which is an evidentiary hearing in Michigan when a defendant claims they've received ineffective assistance of counsel. Her defense attorney testified that they'd watched the recording of Kamaya's interview between 20 and 30 times, and they'd concluded her statements were voluntary. The trial court and appellate court agreed. I think the more interesting, though equally unsuccessful argument was the allegation that Kamaya's defense counsel failed to investigate a battered partner syndrome defense. Battered partner syndrome is a type of post-traumatic stress disorder, a mental illness. It cuts across every demographic group, but the most common risk factor for battered partner syndrome is being a woman, which led to the misnomer of battered woman syndrome. There remain lingering questions about what the Venn diagram of symptoms looks like between men and women coping with battered partner syndrome because of the differences in men's and women's roles and power in social structures. People coping with battered partner syndrome may re-experience their past traumatic events. They might struggle with anxiety, dissociation, and changes in how they view themselves, but also changes in how they relate to and interact with others. The syndrome is most commonly implicated in trials where a defendant kills their abuser. Battered partner syndrome evidence is usually presented by an expert and might serve to dispel the myths and misconceptions about people who've been the victims of physical violence or sexual and psychological abuse. Many of us are abundantly fortunate and will not find ourselves in a position where we experience repeated domestic violence or coercive control. So we might not be able to understand why victims and survivors act or react the way that they do. For instance, why they don't leave. That's why I think it's helpful to have this background that the battered partner syndrome is a subcategory of mental illness. Relevant to this case, Kamaya testified at that Ginther hearing that after she became pregnant with their son, Tyrone became extremely physically, emotionally, verbally, and financially abusive. I'm going to quickly describe the assaults Kamaya claimed Tyrone committed against her, and if you'd like to skip that, I'd recommend scrubbing ahead 30 seconds. Kamaya claimed Tyrone strangled her, punched her, grabbed her by the arms leaving bruises, and one time hit her in the head with the bottle. She claimed that after the birth of their child, Tyrone emotionally abused her, telling her she didn't look good, that no one would love her, and that no one would want to be with her. She said Tyrone maintained a tight grip on their finances and that she needed his permission to spend any money, including her own paycheck. We can't know whether Kamaya showed up to her many prenatal appointments with bruises on her arms or throat. We can't know what happened behind the closed doors of their marriage. As I mentioned in episode 46, Texas vs. Murphy, the most dangerous time for a woman's safety is during and just after pregnancy, and it's a message I'll continue to share until it's as ingrained as the hearsay definition. The problem for Kamaya's claim regarding battered partner syndrome is that the testimony she provided at the Ginther hearing about Tyrone's supposed treatment of her, that was the first time she described the domestic violence incidents. She'd previously told her attorney there had been some domestic violence, but nothing to the extent of her testimony after conviction. Her attorney described what he'd been told as, at most, quote, minimal abuse. In her interviews with police after Tyrone's death, Kamaya said nothing. She never provided some motive for killing her husband. At that Ginther hearing, where she disclosed all this supposed abuse, she again testified that she was not involved in Tyrone's shooting death. She testified that she had never even discussed shooting or killing Tyrone with Cuellar. Given that background, her claim of self-defense buoyed by battered partner syndrome failed. She never asserted that she'd acted in self-defense. She would not admit that she acted at all. The Court of Appeal denied her bid for a new trial and affirmed the judgment. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it. I invite you to submit case suggestions and feedback to conductunbecomingpod@gmail.com or on conductunbecomingpod.com. Join me next time when we tackle a case that runs the full length of the continental United States. Until then, take care. Conduct Unbecoming is a podcast where I get to talk about interesting crimes and cases that involve U.S. military service members. I research, write, and produce the podcast myself. The opinions expressed are my own, and perhaps it's obvious. Conduct Unbecoming is not approved, authorized, or endorsed by the Department of Defense.